A nurse stood trembling in the freezing cold, clutching a newborn tightly in her arms. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "They're coming for my baby. Please don't tell anyone I'm here." But the K9, Rex, wouldn't stop barking, his sharp eyes locked on the motionless child in her arms. Former Navy SEAL Mason knew that bark. It wasn't fear, it was a warning. He stepped closer and froze. The baby's skin was pale, its lips turning blue, completely still. What Mason was about to uncover next will leave you breathless. Before we begin this story, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. The snow fell thick and silent over the outskirts of Denver, muffling the world into shades of gray and white. Streetlights flickered through the veil of flurries, each one haloed like a faint memory. Beside a broken-down Jeep at the edge of a narrow road stood a man and his dog. Two silhouettes carved in the dim amber glow of the last working lamp. Mason Hale, a retired Navy SEAL in his early 40s, was the kind of man whose presence filled a space even when he said nothing. His frame was broad and weathered, muscles carved by years of cold mornings and harder wars. A thick beard shadowed his square jaw, streaked with the first signs of gray that matched the silver at his temples. His hands, rough and scarred, carried the quiet steadiness of a man who had seen too much to ever rush again. Yet behind the lines of fatigue on his face, there was still something alive, an alertness in the eyes, a readiness that no peace could quite erase. Beside him sat Rex, a 5-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat that shimmered like polished bronze beneath the falling snow. His ears stood high, his amber eyes sharp and intelligent, scanning every corner of the empty bus stop ahead. Rex had served with Mason during his last deployment before retirement, a K9 trained in reconnaissance, tracking, and explosives detection. After an injury that left a faint scar across his right shoulder, he had been retired from active duty. Mason adopted him not out of pity, but because the two shared the same quiet fracture, the kind of bond only formed when men and dogs survived the same nightmares. The Jeep had died nearly 40 minutes ago, its engine coughing its last breath in protest. Mason had radioed for roadside assistance, but in this weather, even the snowplows moved slowly. So he waited, breath clouding the frozen air, gloved hands stuffed deep into his coat pockets. Rex lay at his feet, tail occasionally twitching in the snow, the low rumble of his chest a rhythm Mason had come to rely on. But then, without warning, Rex's ears pricked up. The stillness broke. The dog stood, body stiff, tail low, a growl humming from deep within his ribs. His head turned sharply toward the bus shelter a few yards ahead. "What is it, boy?" Mason murmured, scanning the gloom. At first he saw nothing, just snow swirling against the glass panels of the shelter, the wind whispering in restless loops. Then, through the blur, a shape emerged. A woman clutching something close to her chest. She was standing half in shadow, half in light, her hair a dark tangle against the storm. Rex barked once, sharp and loud enough to slice through the wind. Mason's body tensed instinctively, his training returning like muscle memory. He stepped forward cautiously, one gloved hand resting near the pocket where his phone, and, if necessary, his sidearm, waited. The woman didn't move. When he reached the edge of the shelter, Mason saw her clearly for the first time. She was young, perhaps in her early 30s, though exhaustion made her seem older. Her coat hung loosely from narrow shoulders, soaked dark with melting snow. Strands of brown hair clung to her pale cheeks, and her lips were cracked, trembling. Her eyes, wide, glassy, blue as winter glass, looked not at him but somewhere beyond, as if seeing ghosts only she could name. In her arms, wrapped in a gray blanket, lay a small child. Mason's breath caught. The woman blinked once, her voice barely more than a whisper. "They said you'd come." He frowned. "Ma'am, are you all right? You shouldn't be out here. The temperature's dropping fast." She shook her head violently, clutching the bundle tighter. "Don't take him. Please, don't take him." Rex let out another bark, not aggressive, alert, questioning. His head tilted as if he recognized something Mason could not. Mason crouched slightly, palms open in a gesture of calm. "No one's taking anything. I just want to help. Is your baby okay?" Her lips trembled. "He's sleeping." The wind howled past the bus shelter, rattling the plexiglass panels. Mason's instincts screamed at him. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The child hadn't stirred once since he'd arrived. Not a sound, not a twitch. He took a slow step forward. Rex mirrored him, staying low, silent now but tense. "Ma'am," he said softly. "What's your name?" "Lena," she whispered. Her eyes flicked up, distant and unfocused. "Lena Brooks." "Okay, Lena," he said, voice steady. "I'm Mason. I used to work with the Navy. My Jeep broke down over there, so I'm waiting for a tow. You picked the worst night to travel." He tried to smile, but she didn't react. The child's blanket shifted slightly in her grip, and for a moment Mason thought he saw the faintest hint of blue in the child's tiny fingers. His pulse kicked. "Lena," he said quietly, "can I take a look at your baby, just to make sure he's all right?" She froze. The color drained from her face. "Don't," she said sharply. "He needs to rest. They said he needs to sleep until it's safe." "Who said that?" She didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward the snow-covered road, then back to him. She looked trapped between flight and collapse. Rex whimpered, low and mournful. Mason's throat tightened at the sound. Rex only made that noise when he sensed distress, not danger. The blizzard thickened, swallowing the world beyond the bus stop. They were alone in a snow globe of fear and silence. Mason exhaled slowly and reached for his phone. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm calling someone who can help. My friend's a police officer. He can get us a ride to a warm place, maybe even help you find family." "No police," she blurted. "No one can know we're here." Her eyes darted wildly again, and Mason realized she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of someone else. "Lena," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I promise no one will hurt you or your child. But your baby isn't moving, and that scares me. If you don't let me help, he might not—" "Stop!" she cried, staggering back. The child's head lolled slightly in her arms. Mason's gut twisted. He raised both hands. Okay, I'm not touching you. But please, let's go inside somewhere warm. There's a clinic just 10 minutes down the road." The woman's breathing came fast and shallow, each exhale a shudder. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They said if anyone finds us, they'll take him away again." "Who's they?" No answer. Only the wind. Mason took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders despite her protest. She flinched but didn't move away. Her body was ice cold, trembling beneath the weight of the fabric. The dog stepped closer, nose brushing the edge of her boot, then sniffed the child's blanket. His ears twitched, and he whined softly again, tilting his head. That was the moment Mason made his choice. He gently reached out, one finger brushing the baby's hand. It was cold, too cold. He pulled back immediately, his mind racing. He'd seen enough field injuries and medical emergencies to know what danger looked like. He looked at Lena again, voice low and firm now. "We're going to the hospital. That's not a request. Your baby needs help." Tears welled in her eyes. "You'll take him from me." "No," Mason said, meeting her gaze. "I'll take you both. No one's leaving anyone behind." For a long, fragile moment, she said nothing. The storm roared around them, drowning everything else. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Rex," Mason commanded quietly, and the dog stepped aside, clearing the path to his jeep. Mason half-supported Lena as they trudged through the snow. Her steps were uneven, her breath ragged, as if every movement took all that remained of her strength. By the time they reached the jeep, Mason could barely feel his fingers. He settled her in the passenger seat, tucking the blanket closer around the baby. Rex climbed into the back, his eyes never leaving the small bundle. Mason turned the ignition. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life after a stubborn growl. Relief surged through him. He dialed Evan's number on speakerphone. "Evan, it's Mason. I need you at St. Clair's Hospital. I've got a woman and an infant. Possible hypothermia, maybe worse. I'll explain when I get there." "Copy that," came the crackled voice of Officer Evan Grady, a man Mason trusted with his life. As Mason drove, the headlights carved tunnels through the storm. Lena sat motionless beside him, staring ahead, lips moving silently to words only she could hear. Mason glanced at her once. The look in her eyes was something between grief and belief, a woman clinging to the last splinter of hope. He pressed harder on the accelerator. Rex leaned forward from the back seat, his nose resting on the edge of the baby's blanket. Mason swore he saw the child's chest rise, just barely. "Hang on, kid," he whispered. "You're gonna make it." Outside, the snow howled on. Inside that small cocoon of metal and warmth, 3 lives, one broken, one lost, one loyal, moved toward the uncertain light of a hospital, where truths far darker than the storm awaited. Morning seeped pale and cold through the blinds of St. Clair's Hospital, casting thin ribbons of light across the linoleum floor. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the world outside glazed in white silence. Inside, machines hummed softly, nurses murmured in the hallway, and the smell of antiseptic clung to the air like a ghost. Mason Hale stood by the window of a small waiting room, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn navy jacket. His face, roughened by years of salt air and battle dust, looked more weathered under the fluorescent light. He hadn't slept since the night before, and his dark eyes, sharp yet tired, traced the patterns of melting snow on the glass. Rex sat at his feet, head resting on his paws, tail occasionally thumping as if to remind Mason he was there. The dog had a small patch of fur shaved on his shoulder, where the medic had cleaned a minor cut. Nothing serious, but it made Mason uneasy. He'd seen too many small wounds become scars that never really healed. The door opened quietly. Officer Evan Grady stepped in, brushing off his coat. Evan was in his late 30s, tall and lean, with a clean-cut look that made him appear younger than he was. His uniform fit perfectly, his badge gleaming on his chest, and a faint smell of coffee followed him. But what really defined Evan was his composure. Years of working homicide had stripped him of illusions, but not compassion. He greeted Mason with a nod that spoke of respect and shared history. They'd served together in a joint task years ago during a domestic rescue mission, a night neither of them liked to remember. "Morning," Evan said, his voice low and steady. "Morning," Mason replied. "How's she doing?" Evan exhaled, pulling out a folded file. "Stable, physically at least. The doctors gave her a mild sedative. She's still disoriented, keeps asking for her son." Mason frowned. "She called the baby her son. You ran her ID?" Evan nodded, flipping open the file. "Name's Lena Brooks, 31. Former combat medic, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. Honorably discharged after sustaining a head injury from a roadside explosion. Lost her husband and child in a car accident 3 years ago. Drunk driver, no survivors." Mason's eyes darkened. "That explains the look in her eyes." Evan continued. After the accident, she spent 18 months under treatment at Silver Light Institute in Boulder, supposedly a trauma recovery facility specializing in memory reconditioning. But something's off. Records are clean. Too clean. No therapy notes, no discharge evaluation, just a signature from her attending physician, Dr. Harold Vance. Mason glanced up. Vance? Yeah, psychologist, mid-50s, PhD from Stanford, runs Silver Light with private funding. He's got patents for some kind of neuroassociative therapy, experimental stuff. Evan lowered his voice. You ever hear of memory rebirth? Therapy? Mason shook his head slowly. No, but sounds like the kind of thing that promises miracles and delivers ghosts. Before Evan could respond, the door opened again. A woman in a white coat entered, carrying a clipboard. Her name tag read, Dr. Marissa Caldwell. She was in her 40s, tall and slender, with streaks of gray through her dark hair tied neatly at the back. Her face bore the calm efficiency of someone who had seen every kind of pain, but refused to be hardened by it. Mr. Hale, she said softly, I'm Dr. Caldwell. You were the one who brought Ms. Brooks and the infant in last night? Yes, Mason replied. How's the baby? She offered a reassuring nod. He's stable. Mild hypothermia and traces of sedative in his system, likely benzodiazepine, but we're running full toxicology. He's responding to treatment. You got him here just in time. Mason let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Rex's tail thumped once, as if sensing the relief. Dr. Caldwell hesitated. However, there's something strange. The drug in the baby's system isn't over the counter. It's medical grade. The dosage suggests precision, not accident. Mason's jaw clenched. You mean someone knew exactly what they were doing? She nodded. Yes, and there's one more thing. Ms. Brooks's blood work shows residual traces of chloroform. That word hung heavy in the sterile air. Mason exchanged a grim look with Evan. Chloroform? Evan repeated. That's not something you just pick up at a pharmacy. Dr. Caldwell folded her arms. I can't say what's happening here, but if this woman was being manipulated or drugged, she needs psychiatric evaluation under protection, not suspicion. Agreed, Mason said quietly. Can I see her? Dr. Caldwell nodded. Keep it brief. She's still fragile. Mason followed her down the hall. The rhythmic beep of monitors echoed through the corridor, blending with the hush of rubber soles. Rex padded behind them, his claws clicking faintly on the tile. They reached a small recovery room where Lena lay in bed, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Her hair was damp, clean now, framing her face in soft brown waves. The bruised hollows beneath her eyes made her look both younger and older at once. A woman trapped between years of grief and the mind of a frightened child. When Mason entered, she stirred, eyes fluttering open. Recognition flickered in them. You came? She whispered. I said I would, he replied gently. He pulled a chair closer to her bed. How are you feeling? She hesitated, fingers fidgeting with the blanket's edge. Tired. Like I've been asleep for years. Mason nodded. You remember what happened at the bus stop? Her brow furrowed. They told me to go there. Said it was the only way to keep him safe. Who told you? She looked away, her gaze drifting toward the window. Dr. Harold, he said my son had come back, that he'd been given a second life. I just had to find him before they took him again. Her voice trembled and tears welled up. He showed me pictures. The same eyes, the same birthmark. I thought it was real. Mason's voice stayed calm. Do you remember how you got the baby? Lena shook her head. It's all foggy. I woke up in a room, white walls, bright lights, and a nurse handed him to me. She said I was chosen. Then everything went dark." Mason's chest tightened. The story fit too neatly with the chloroform and sedatives. Before he could ask more, Evan entered quietly. "Mason, we might have a problem." Lena flinched at the sight of the badge, shrinking into the bed. Mason raised a hand. "It's all right, he's a friend." Evan stepped closer. "I ran the name Silver Light through internal databases. Guess what? 2 malpractice claims sealed by federal court orders, both tied to Vance, and one of his patients vanished 6 months ago." Dr. Caldwell frowned. "And nobody shut him down?" "Private funding," Evan said bitterly. "The kind of people who make problems disappear." Rex lifted his head, ears twitching. A low growl hummed from his throat. Mason followed the dog's gaze to the hallway, just a shadow passing the frosted glass, but enough to put his instincts on edge. "Someone's there," he murmured. Evan moved to the door and glanced out, but the corridor was empty. Only a janitor's cart stood at the far end, the faint squeak of wheels echoing. The janitor, a heavy-set man in his 50s with salt and pepper stubble and a limp, pushed the cart forward without looking up. His name tag read Carl. Mason noted him quietly. Something about the man's stillness didn't feel right, but now wasn't the time. Back inside, Lena had started trembling again. "He knows," she whispered. "He always knows when someone talks about him." "Who, Lena?" Mason asked. She met his eyes, and the answer came like a breath of winter. "Dr. Harold." Evan's radio crackled suddenly, making everyone jump. "Dispatch to Unit 42. Reports of a break-in at Silverlight Institute. Possible arson." Mason and Evan exchanged a look. "That's not coincidence," Mason said. Evan nodded grimly. "Looks like someone's cleaning house." Mason turned to Lena, his tone gentle but firm. "We'll find out what happened to you, Lena, and whoever did this, we'll stop him." Her eyes filled with tears. "You can't stop him. He makes people forget." Mason stood slowly, the resolve in his face hardening into something old and familiar, the expression of a man who had seen too many missions begin with fear and end with fire. "Then we'll make him remember," he said quietly. Rex's tail flicked once against the floor, the only sound in the room besides the steady hum of the machines. The morning came colorless, the kind that barely deserved the word. A thin mist clung to the hospital parking lot, softening the edges of cars and people into pale silhouettes. Mason Hale leaned against the hood of Evan's cruiser, the chill biting through his jacket. His eyes were on the horizon, where mountains loomed like sleeping giants under a veil of frost. Rex sat beside him, alert as ever, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Evan exited the hospital doors, a folder tucked under his arm. His expression was grim but focused, the look of a man who had already accepted a long day ahead. "Got something?" he said, handing Mason a small evidence bag. Inside was a crumpled note, its edges stained faintly with what looked like disinfectant. Written in hurried, uneven handwriting were the words, "Cabin 9, Snowpine Ridge." Beneath that, a series of GPS coordinates. Mason turned the note over, his mind racing. "Snowpine Ridge. That's in the Rockies, isn't it? North of Boulder?" Evan nodded. "An old logging route, mostly abandoned. There are a few hunting cabins left, but nothing official. No power grid, no cell coverage. If Silver Light's been doing something off the books, that's where I'd hide it." Rex gave a short, low bark, as if seconding the thought. Mason looked down at him with a faint smile. "Guess we're thinking the same thing, partner." Then, turning to Evan, "We should go before someone gets there first. If that break-in last night was to destroy evidence, this cabin might be next." Before they could move, A nurse called out from the hospital entrance. It was Nurse Dana Mills, a woman in her late 20s with auburn hair tied into a loose ponytail and freckles dusting her pale cheeks. She wore a sky-blue scrub top under a wool jacket and held a clipboard against her chest. Her kind, open face showed genuine concern. "Detective Grady," she said, catching her breath. "I just came from Ms. Brooks's room. She's asking for Mr. Hale." Mason straightened. "What's wrong?" "She's calm now," Dana replied softly. "But she keeps repeating something about Cabin 9. She said it's where they took the others. I thought you'd want to know." Evan exchanged a look with Mason. "The others," he murmured. "That confirms it. She's not the only one." Mason nodded, then placed a hand on Dana's shoulder. "Thanks. You've done more than you know." When Mason entered Lena's room, she was sitting upright, her eyes distant but more lucid than before. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, striping her pale skin with lines of gold. Her hands trembled as she clutched the hospital blanket, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You're going there, aren't you?" Mason nodded. "We found the coordinates." Lena's eyes flicked to the window. "He won't stop you. Not yet. Harold likes to watch people think they've found him. He says it helps him understand fear." Mason crouched beside her bed. "Lena, you have to help me. What's at Cabin 9? Her breathing quickened. "They called it the quiet room, a place where memory doesn't hurt anymore. He said if I stayed long enough, I'd wake up without pain." She pressed her hand to her temple. "There were others like me, men, women, each told the same thing, that they could bring back the ones they lost." "Did you see any of them?" Mason asked, her gaze unfocused, as though peering into a nightmare. "Yes, but their eyes, they were empty, like they'd been taught to forget who they were." Mason placed his hand gently over hers. "You're safe now. We'll find them." When he stood to leave, she caught his wrist suddenly. "If you see him," she whispered, "don't believe what he says. Harold makes you doubt what's real. He makes you see what you want most." Mason met her eyes, steady. "I don't play by his rules." By noon, Mason and Evan were on the road, heading north. The highway wound through thick forests, the pines heavy with snow. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows that seemed to follow them like ghosts. The cruiser's heater hummed, but the air between them was tense, heavy with what lay ahead. "You think she's telling the truth?" Evan asked. "Every word," Mason replied. "You can fake fear. You can't fake that kind of pain." Rex rested his head between the front seats, eyes half closed but ears twitching at every noise. Mason reached back to scratch his neck absently. "You feel it too, don't you, boy? Something's waiting up there." As they climbed higher into the mountains, the radio lost signal. Snowpine Ridge appeared at last, a narrow trail splitting off the main road, marked only by a weathered wooden sign half buried in snow. They turned down it, the tires crunched over ice and gravel, the forest thickening on either side. After nearly an hour, the trees parted to reveal a small clearing. There, at the edge of the ridge, stood Cabin 9. It was old, its logs gray and warped with time, the roof sagging under the weight of snow. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but faint footprints dotted the front steps. Fresh ones. Mason and Evan exchanged a silent nod. They exited the car, weapons drawn. Rex padded ahead, nose close to the ground. Inside, the air smelled of mold, chemicals, and something faintly metallic. A table stood in the center, littered with medical tools. Needles, vials, bandages. The walls were lined with faded photographs, people smiling blankly, each with a number instead of a name scrawled beneath. Evan moved to a cabinet and pried it open. Inside were patient files, dozens of them. He flipped through the first few, brow furrowing. Jesus, Mason. These are all from Silver Light. They're missing persons reports. Mason scanned the room. He brought them here. Experimented, maybe. Whatever Harold was doing. This was his testing ground. Suddenly, Rex growled, low and sharp. He stood near a trap door half hidden under a rug. Mason knelt, lifted it, and a gust of stale air rose from the darkness below. Steps descended into a narrow basement lit by a single flickering bulb. They moved cautiously downward, Rex leading. The basement was small, lined with cold storage units and labeled boxes. In the corner stood a glass chamber, like something from a laboratory, its interior fogged. On a nearby desk lay open folders, one labeled Project Seraphim, Stage 2 Trials. Evan snapped photos with his phone. "This is it. We've got enough to bury him." Mason approached the chamber, wiped the glass, and froze. Inside was a hospital cot. Shackles hung from its sides, and on the floor beside it lay a child's toy. A small wooden horse, freshly painted blue. He remembered Lena saying her son loved horses. His stomach turned cold. Footsteps crunched above them. Both men went still. Evan whispered, "We're not alone." The faint creak of a door, then silence. Mason motioned to Rex, who stood poised, ears sharp. The dog's nostrils flared. Whoever was upstairs wasn't trying to hide anymore. They climbed back up, guns ready. The front door stood open, snow drifting in. On the porch lay a single envelope, weighted by a stone. Mason picked it up. Inside, written in precise handwriting, were 3 words. "Stop digging, soldier." Mason's jaw tightened. Evan looked at him grimly. "Looks like Harold's still 2 steps ahead." Mason glanced at Rex, whose eyes burned with quiet defiance. "Not for long," he said. The wind howled through the trees, scattering snow across the clearing as they turned back toward the car. Evidence in hand, resolve even sharper. Somewhere behind the mountains, the shadow of Silver Light waited, watching, preparing its next move. The road to the mountains was nothing but a ribbon of ice and shadow. By dusk, the last light had faded behind the peaks, and the world was swallowed in blue-gray twilight. Mason drove in silence, the wipers beating a steady rhythm against the falling snow. Evan sat beside him, eyes on the GPS, and Rex rested in the back seat, his head up, muscles tense, watching the road as if he too knew something dark waited ahead. They arrived at what had once been the Silver Light Experimental Unit. A sprawling research complex long abandoned by the world, its windows dark and blind, its walls buried under frost. The sign at the gate, half bent and rusted, still bore the emblem of a caduceus entwined with a strand of DNA. The words, Silver Light Experimental Division, were etched beneath, faded by time, but not by guilt. Evan parked behind a cluster of pine trees. "No tracks," he said, scanning the snow. "Whoever left that message at Cabin 9 must have already moved." Mason stepped out, the cold biting through his boots. Or they're still inside. Rex leapt from the car, landing softly on the powder. His nose twitched, and he let out a low growl. A warning. Mason felt it too. The electric tension that soldiers knew before a firefight. He gripped his flashlight and motioned for Evan to follow. They slipped through a broken service door, entering a corridor lined with peeling paint and shattered glass. The air smelled of mildew and something faintly chemical, like old disinfectant. Their footsteps echoed faintly, the sound swallowed by the emptiness. As they advanced, they found rooms filled with the remnants of experiments long abandoned, rusted operating tables, restraints still bolted to metal frames, and faded charts pinned to corkboards showing brainwave patterns marked Phase 3 Compliance. Rex stopped at one door and scratched lightly. Mason crouched, shining his light on the plaque. Research Ward C, Neural Conditioning. The door was ajar. Inside, rows of old recliner chairs faced a massive screen on the far wall. Headsets and electrodes dangled from tangled wires like dead serpents. "This isn't medicine," Evan muttered. "This is control." Mason's eyes narrowed. "It's brainwashing." A faint hum echoed from deeper within the facility, somewhere below. They followed the sound to a stairwell descending into darkness. Each step creaked beneath their boots. The temperature dropped as they went lower, their breath clouding in front of them. The hum grew louder. A generator, still running. At the bottom, the hallway widened into a chamber lined with reinforced glass. Behind the glass were observation rooms, and in each, more photographs pinned in neat rows, faces of men and women labeled subjects, 32 to 48. At the center of the chamber stood a glass-walled control room, filled with monitors still flickering with static. And standing there, as if he had been waiting for them, was Dr. Harold Vance. He was tall, thin, with sharp, angular features and steel-gray hair combed neatly back. His white lab coat was immaculate, almost glowing under the fluorescent lights. His eyes were cold and intelligent, the kind that could cut through flesh and thought alike. There was no madness in them, only purpose. "Mr. Hale," Vance said, his voice calm and smooth, like a teacher greeting an unruly student. "And Detective Grady, I was wondering when you'd find me." Mason leveled his gun. "Step away from the console." Vance smiled faintly. "Always the soldier. You think violence restores order, but you've never understood the mind, have you? The mind is where wars are truly fought and won." Evan moved closer, weapon raised. "You drugged and manipulated veterans. You made them believe the dead were alive. That's not therapy, that's torture." Vance's eyes glittered. "Therapy is the reordering of pain. I gave them peace. You call it delusion. I call it mercy." On one of the monitors behind him, a video flickered to life. Lena Brooks sitting in a chair, electrodes on her temples, her voice monotone. "He said my boy will come back. He said pain can be rewritten." Mason's jaw tightened. "You turned grief into an experiment." Vance stepped closer to the glass, his reflection fractured by light. "You of all people should understand, Mr. Hale. How many brothers did you bury in silence? How many times did you wish to see one face again? I simply gave that wish form." Rex growled low, teeth bared. "Enough," Mason said. "You're coming with us." Vance sighed, almost theatrically. "I'm afraid I can't allow that." He pressed a button on the console. Instantly, alarms wailed. Metal shutters slammed down over exits. From the side corridor, 2 armed guards appeared, faces expressionless, eyes glazed like dolls. "Subjects 51 and 52, Vance said with pride. "The perfect soldiers. No fear, no hesitation, just obedience." Gunfire erupted. Mason and Evan dove behind a table, shards of glass exploding around them. Rex lunged forward, tackling one guard to the ground, teeth sinking into his arm. The man didn't even scream. Evan fired, hitting the other guard in the leg, sending him sprawling. Vance fled toward the far door. Mason gave chase, heart pounding. He burst into the next room, a smaller lab filled with glowing screens and humming machines. Vance was at another terminal, downloading files onto a portable drive. Mason raised his gun. "It's over, Vance." Vance turned slowly, blood speckling his collar from a grazing bullet. "No, Mr. Hale, it's just beginning." He tapped a key. The monitors around them came alive, videos of patients in trance, repeating names of dead loved ones, sobbing, screaming, believing. Among them, Lena's face appeared again, whispering, "I see him. I see my boy." The images seared into Mason's mind. For a brief moment, the past broke. Through the faces of his fallen teammates, their laughter before the silence. He blinked hard, shaking it off. Vance saw it and smiled knowingly. "You see," he said softly, "even you carry ghosts. Let me take them from you." "Not a chance," Mason growled. Before Vance could reach for another switch, a sudden bark broke the tension. Rex burst through the doorway, limping but relentless. He lunged at Vance, knocking him off balance. The drive skidded across the floor. Mason kicked it away, then tackled Vance, pinning him down. Evan appeared moments later, breath ragged. "Got the control panel," he said. "Systems shutting down." As lights flickered and alarms faded, Vance laughed quietly beneath Mason's weight. "You think you've won? The mind forgets, but the idea? Never." Mason pressed the barrel of his gun to the floor beside his head. "Then I'll make sure the world remembers what you did here." Vance's smile faltered. "You don't understand, soldier. This was never about me. It was about you, all of you who can't stop fighting ghosts." Rex barked again, a sharp sound that shattered the silence. The dog's shoulder was bleeding, but his eyes burned with fierce loyalty. Mason stood, cuffing Vance's hands with zip ties. "Evan," he said quietly, "call it in. We're done here." Evan nodded and stepped out to radio backup. Mason looked around the lab one last time, the screens fading to black, the hum of machines dying like a heartbeat slowing to silence. He picked up the blue wooden horse from the corner, brushing the dust from its painted mane. For a moment, he imagined Lena's boy playing with it, a memory twisted by a madman's promise. He slipped the toy into his pocket. "You won't hurt anyone else," he said to Vance. The doctor said nothing, only stared at the dark ceiling as if watching the end of a dream. Outside, the snow fell harder, burying the tracks that led to the truth. The snow outside St. Clair's Hospital had begun to melt, turning the streets into a gray river of slush. It was dawn again, the kind of pale, fragile light that made everything look washed clean, though nothing truly was. Mason Hale stood in the hospital corridor, leaning against the cold metal railing, staring through the glass where the city blinked awake in silence. He hadn't slept in nearly 40 hours. His clothes were still dusted with ash and dirt from the Silverlight raid, the cuffs of his jacket streaked with Rex's dried blood. Rex lay beside him on a blanket, bandaged but alert. The dog's left shoulder was wrapped tight in white gauze, but his eyes, those deep, loyal amber eyes, remained bright. A nurse had wanted to move him to the animal wing for treatment, but Mason refused. "He stays with me," he'd said simply. And Rex did, watching the hallway as if guarding his partner from ghosts that might still walk it. The sound of boots echoed from the far end. Detective Evan Grady approached, holding a cup of black coffee. His uniform was rumpled, tie loose, but his eyes were sharp beneath the fatigue. He handed the coffee to Mason. "You look like hell." Mason gave a tired half smile. "I've looked worse." Evan leaned against the opposite wall, taking a sip of his own. "Vance is in federal custody. They've already confirmed at least 9 missing persons linked to Silverlight. The basement we raided wasn't the only one. There were satellite sites. But you got him, Mason. It's over." Mason stared into his cup, the steam rising like smoke. "You ever wonder if it's really over? Guys like him don't work alone." Evan sighed. "The Bureau's digging. They'll find out who funded this." From down the hall, a voice called softly. "Mr. Hale?" It was Dr. Marissa Caldwell, still in her white coat, her dark hair tied back neatly, though her eyes showed the weight of too many long nights. She gestured toward one of the recovery rooms. "She's awake." Mason followed her quietly, Rex padding along despite the limp. Inside, the room was bright with morning light, Lena Brooks sat propped up against the pillows, pale but conscious, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a hospital gown and a look of confusion so deep it was almost childlike. When she saw Mason, something in her expression softened. "You came back," she said weakly. "I said I would," Mason replied. Dr. Caldwell gave a gentle nod and slipped out, closing the door behind them. For a moment, the only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor. Mason pulled a chair closer to the bed. Rex settled at his feet, resting his chin on Lena's blanket. She reached down hesitantly and stroked the dog's head. "He remembers me," she whispered. "He remembers everything," Mason said quietly. Lena's gaze drifted toward the window. "I don't know what's real anymore. I see flashes. The cabin. The doctor. His voice. He told me I was chosen." She shut her eyes, tears welling. "Was any of it true?" Mason hesitated, then shook his head. "No, Lena, none of it. The baby, he's safe. His name's Connor. His real mother is alive. She was one of the women Vance took before you. They're reuniting today." Lena's lip trembled. "So he's not." Her voice broke. "He's not mine." Mason reached out, resting a hand on her shoulder. "No, but you saved him, Lena. You got him out of there." She let out a choked laugh that turned into a sob. "I just wanted to see my son again. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't even know I was hurting anyone." "It's not your fault," Mason said softly. "You were used. Vance took your grief and turned it into a weapon." Her tears fell freely now. He said pain could be rewritten. "Pain can't be erased," Mason said, his voice low and steady. "But it can be shared. That's how you survive it." Rex whimpered, pressing his head against Lena's hand. She stroked his fur slowly, her trembling easing. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was the kind that lets people breathe again after drowning. After a while, there was a knock on the door. Evan stepped in, carrying a folder. "We're transferring Vance to a secure facility," he said. Before he went quiet, he gave a full statement. Claims the memory rebirth program was designed to heal trauma through substitution. He believed that if you implant a comforting illusion deeply enough, the pain of loss disappears. Lena looked up. "And what happens to the illusion?" Evan's expression hardened. "It becomes reality, to the patient, until it breaks." Mason shook his head. "That's not healing. That's erasing people." Evan nodded grimly. "The feds found a list of donors, some big names, pharmaceutical companies, private defense contractors. He had funding from people who wanted to test compliance therapy. This wasn't just about grief. It was about control." Lena's face drained of color. "They wanted to make soldiers forget?" Evan sighed. "And civilians, too. Vance was just the scientist. Someone else paid for the research." The words hung heavy in the air. Mason finally stood. "We'll get them." Evan gave him a look that was half pride, half exhaustion. "I knew you'd say that." When he left, Lena turned back to Mason. "What happens to me now?" "You'll stay here for a while," Mason said. "Dr. Caldwell's the best there is. She'll help you piece things back together." "I don't even know who I am without the pain," she whispered. Mason looked at her, eyes soft. "Maybe you don't have to be anyone new. Maybe you just learn to live with the pieces and let people help you carry them." Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "That's what you did, isn't it?" Mason glanced down at Rex. "Yeah, him and me. We figured it out together." She reached for his hand. "Thank you, Mason, for not giving up on me." He squeezed her hand gently. "That's not what soldiers do." Outside the window, the first hints of spring sunlight began melting the last of the snow. Hours later, Mason stood in the courtyard, talking quietly with Evan and Dr. Caldwell as Rex lay nearby. Ambulances and patrol cars came and went, the chaos of aftermath finally ebbing into calm. Caldwell looked at Mason. "You know, if you hadn't brought her in that night, she and that baby wouldn't have made it." Mason shrugged. "Luck." "No," she said softly. "Instinct." Evan folded his arms. "So what now? You going to stick around Denver?" Mason looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail faintly. "Maybe for a while. The world's still got ghosts to clean up." Evan smiled faintly. "Then let me know when you find them. I'll bring the coffee." Mason watched him walk away, then knelt beside Rex. The dog's eyes closed, content in the sunlight. Mason rubbed behind his ears. "We did good, buddy, real good." Rex thumped his tail twice, the sound small but certain. Behind them, the hospital doors opened. Lena stepped out, wearing a simple sweater and jeans instead of her gown. She looked fragile but present, her face washed clean of fear. She carried a paper cup of tea and a small folded note. "I wrote something," she said quietly, handing it to Mason. He unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven but steady. "Pain shared is pain divided. Thank you for reminding me that the world still holds good men." Mason looked up, meeting her eyes. "You'll be all right, Lena?" She nodded, smiling faintly. "I think so." The wind carried the faint scent of pine and thawing snow. Somewhere far away, sirens faded into silence. And for the first time in years, Mason felt the quiet not as an emptiness, but as peace. The morning light stretched across the valley like a slow exhale, touching the dew on the grass and turning it to gold. A soft breeze carried the scent of pine and rain, drifting over the open field where a dozen men and women stood in quiet anticipation. Beyond them, the sign read, "Rex's Haven, a sanctuary for healing minds." The letters were carved into oak, sturdy and simple, just the way Mason Hale liked things. It had been 6 months since the fall of Silver Light and the sentencing of Dr. Harold Vance. The trial had been short, but brutal, every testimony like reopening a wound. Vance had stood in the courtroom with that same unreadable calm, insisting that his work had saved people, even as victims wept. Mason had testified, Evan at his side, Rex sitting obediently near the stand. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the applause that followed had been muted by grief. Justice, Mason had learned, never felt like victory. It just felt necessary. Now, standing in the crisp air of a Colorado spring, Mason felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. He wore a navy jacket with the Haven's insignia stitched over the chest, his posture relaxed, but still bearing the quiet authority of a soldier. His hair had begun to gray at the temples, a reminder that time moved even when he forgot to notice. Rex trotted beside him, the faint scar on his shoulder now hidden beneath his thick, sable coat. The dog was 6 years old, muscular yet gentle, his eyes full of intelligence and calm. He moved with the confidence of one who had seen both war and redemption. Today, a silver medallion hung from his collar, catching the sunlight with every step. Evan Grady approached from the parking lot, a file under one arm, and a grin that didn't quite mask the lines of exhaustion around his eyes. He had traded his detective's suit for a casual flannel and jeans, but the badge still glinted from his belt. A man who couldn't entirely walk away from the badge even if he tried. "You're really doing this, huh?" he said, clapping Mason on the shoulder. "From SEAL Ops to therapy dogs. Never thought I'd see the day." Mason smirked. "You and me both." Evan handed him the file. "Official approval. County board signed off this morning. You're legit now." Mason raised an eyebrow. "Took them long enough." "Bureaucracy," Evan muttered. "They'll probably want to name a committee for your coffee maker next." The two men shared a quiet laugh. From across the field, Lena Brooks emerged, carrying a tray of coffee cups. She looked transformed, still slender but stronger, her posture steady, her face brighter. Her chestnut hair, once tangled and dull, now shimmered in the sun. She wore the blue uniform of a medical coordinator, the Haven's logo stitched neatly over the pocket. Though her eyes still carried the trace of sorrow, they also held resolve. "Coffee, gentlemen?" she asked with a soft smile. Mason took one cup, meeting her gaze. "You've outdone yourself, Lena. Everything looks perfect." She smiled, but her voice carried quiet humility. "It's the people who matter, not the place. You gave them somewhere to start again." Rex wagged his tail and nudged her hand. She laughed softly, scratching behind his ear. "And you, hero, are the real reason they came." Nearby, volunteers set up folding chairs while a small crowd gathered for the opening ceremony. Reporters, veterans, and families. A few therapy dogs sat beside their handlers, tails wagging, the air filled with gentle excitement. At the front, a short woman with curly black hair and a bright yellow scarf arranged a microphone. This was Karen Doyle, the event coordinator, known for her warm voice and relentless optimism. Her round face radiated kindness. She had been one of the first donors to believe in Mason's vision. "All right, folks," she called out cheerfully. "Let's get ready. We're live in 5. As the guests settled, Mason stood near the podium, heart steady but full. He glanced at Evan, who gave him a nod. Then he looked at Lena, who stood beside Rex, her hands clasped tightly. When Karen introduced him, the applause was modest but heartfelt. Mason stepped forward, clearing his throat. "6 months ago," he began, "I thought I'd seen the worst of humanity. I thought pain was something you survived alone. But I was wrong. Healing isn't about forgetting what hurt you. It's about finding the courage to face it, together." He paused, looking toward Lena and Rex. "This place isn't about erasing memories. It's about reclaiming them, turning scars into something that reminds us we made it through." A hush settled over the crowd. Mason took a slow breath. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that sometimes the smallest acts, the loyalty of a friend, the touch of a dog, can save a life. I've seen it. I've lived it." Applause followed, soft but filled with emotion. When the ceremony ended, Karen stepped up again, holding a small velvet box. "Before we close, there's one more honor to give," she said. "For extraordinary bravery, compassion, and service beyond duty, the state recognizes Canine Rex with the title of Canine of the Year." The crowd erupted in applause. Mason crouched beside Rex as Karen placed the medallion around his neck. Cameras clicked. The sun flashed off the silver badge. Rex tilted his head curiously, tongue lolling as if smiling for the crowd. Lena wiped her eyes, laughing. "I think he knows exactly what's happening." Mason chuckled. "He probably thinks it's for the snacks." After the crowd dispersed, Mason, Lena, and Evan stood watching Rex run free across the open field, his body a streak of golden motion against the green. The other dogs followed, tails wagging, the air alive with barking and laughter. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Evan asked quietly. Mason shook his head. "Not in a million years." Lena smiled faintly. "You saved me, Mason." He looked at her, his voice soft but firm. "No, Lena, you saved yourself. We just gave you a place to do it." For a while, they stood in silence, watching the wind ripple through the grass. Evan took a deep breath. "You know," he said, "this might be the first time in my career I've seen a real miracle." Mason smiled, eyes on Rex bounding through the sunlight. Miracles don't always come to bring someone back, he said quietly. Sometimes they come to remind us who we still are. Lena's eyes glistened. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. And sometimes, that miracle barks. Rex paused mid-run, turning toward them as if he had heard her. Then he let out a bright, joyful bark that echoed across the valley, bouncing off the mountains like laughter carried on the wind. Mason watched him with a smile that reached his tired eyes. "Come on, partner," he murmured. "Time to start the next chapter." Rex bounded back, leaping into Mason's waiting arms, his fur shining under the dawn. And for the first time in years, Mason felt the weight of the past finally lift, replaced not by forgetfulness, but by faith. Faith that healing, no matter how long delayed, always finds its way home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in blinding light or thunder. They come quietly, through the kindness of a stranger, the loyalty of a dog, or the courage to forgive. Maybe that's how God works most days. Not by changing the world all at once, but by whispering hope into broken hearts one soul at a time. If this story touched something in you, share it. Leave a comment about the miracles you've seen, the ones you still pray for. And if you believe God still walks beside those who are hurting, subscribe and stay with us. May He bless you and keep you, and may His quiet miracles find their way to your life too.